Good evening, good afternoon. Welcome back to High Top Sports, Oregon. And today we are talking a little scrimmage notes. Going to be a little bit shorter one. We do have the spring game that is going to happen in about 13 days, 14 days. So looking forward to that, and then we'll have a reaction on that afterwards. But let's go ahead and bring in Derek the Duck, see what he's thinking about these scrimmage notes, and we'll go ahead and get to it. How you doing?
Good, man. I'm getting excited. I'm getting sick of watching these, other spring games. So I'm ready to get ours cracking. I know it kind of sucks having ours the very end of April, but I'm excited we're heading toward that time.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely, like we talked, it's a little late of a spring game, but kind of gives you a chance to scope out the competition and see what everybody else is doing, and then you have a good comparison. So
Yeah, it's nice. And like we were saying before the show, at this point in the year, football is football. So I guess I gotta be grateful we got something going on.
yeah, for sure. So obviously, Oregon has a scrimmage this past week. You said it was a little tough finding some info just because of the lockdown nature of what the Oregon Ducks are keeping to themselves. But what did you hear through the grapevine? What's the word on the street? Let's go ahead and start with quarterbacks. Obviously, there's a maybe a quarterback competition brewing with you have Gabriel, and then you have more. So what's it sounding like with those guys?
Yeah, you kind of touched on it, going into it. Finding notes on this scrimmage was like pulling teeth. Obviously, there was very little media access that was able to take place this past weekend. But one of the things that we were able to hear from Coach Lanning in his post scrimmage interview was the fact that, all four quarterbacks going all the way down to true freshman Luke Moga and obviously Austin Novosad being the other one, all four quarterbacks were garnering extreme praise from Coach Lanning. So that's really good to hear. Sounds like the quarterbacks are able to pick up the game plan a little bit, and they're progressing through the playbook, getting a little more complex as we navigate through the spring. But the one thing I really did see was the effectiveness of the QBs using their legs and not necessarily scrambling to gain yardage. It was just strictly the in the pocket mobility that was taking place. That's something that Coach Lanning had mentioned that he really liked to see. Obviously, we know that Dylan Gabriel can scoot a little bit using his legs. Dante Moore, he's another guy he's fairly quick. You won't see him take off quite as frequently as a guy like Dylan Gabriel, but it was something that we were seeing in the scrimmage this past weekend. So it was kind of nice to hear that all four quarterbacks were playing extremely well. It's a good problem to have when you have three quarterbacks really going down to Austin Novosad that are trying to compete for a starting job in that backup gig. We kind of know what it's going to look like where Dylan Gabriel's likely taking the reins week one. Dante Moore will probably be sitting in that backup role. But, if there's one thing we know about Oregon and how Dan Lanning handles, competition is that there's going to be competition all the way until that first game. And then even after there. So we've talked about before how, we know that he's going to be able to put out the guy who gives them the best chance to win on a week-to-week basis, whether that's more or Gabriel, still yet to be seen.
Obviously, over the limits. So this is pretty big for the coaching staff to figure out who's going to essentially make the cut and who is not going to make the cut and get asked to leave. Do you see obviously all four quarterbacks being able to stay and not hop in the portal for the spring portal that opens up I think today?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously it's all speculation to this point. All we can do is give our best guess. There's always surprises that end up hitting the portal. If I were to guess right now, what I guess or what I see happening is I think Austin Novosad stays put. Same with Luke Mogo. Obviously, we're going to see a red shirt for sure there. But it will, from everything we've heard from Austin Novosad, it sounds like he's more embracing the competition that's taking place. Whether that holds true throughout the spring and he gets better opportunities to maybe go play a little bit sooner elsewhere, that's still yet to be seen. But if I were to project it down, I do think that we see the four scholarship quarterbacks all stay on the roster. Like I said, the portal is going to get really interesting here starting early this week, so definitely something to keep an eye on moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. And then let's go ahead and let's jump to the defensive side of the ball. How did that look with some of the spring notes, and then we'll tack on the portal question at the end.
Sure. Yeah. So this past week, Dan Lanning had kind of mentioned that it was really a tale of two halves of the scrimmage for the defense. I believe, his exact quote talking about the first half of the scrimmage was the offense absolutely dominated. Um, so it's this early in the spring and when you're playing your own guys, it's really hard to tell, is that due to the fact that the offense is truly going to be elite and, they have that much high quality depth to it? Or is it a thing where the defense is starting, struggling to gel a little bit? Which definitely could be the case, just seeing as how there's so many portal additions that are on this year's roster compared to what we were seeing last year at this time. So that's yet to be seen. But what he did say about the defense moving forward was heading into that second half, the rain started falling a little bit heavier down in Eugene. But he did say the defense picked it up in the second half, particularly in the run defense and the defensive line. So that, honestly, it's kind of something that I'm a little relieved to hear that the defensive line was playing well and the rush attack was formidable. But we definitely need to continue to see growth in the spring in that defensive line unit, just because we would say that is our biggest question mark on this year's roster.
And then defensive line wise and DBs, are you expecting any portal entries? And is it going to be all out and no taking of players in the portal? Obviously, you guys are over on the scholarships. Do you see them, letting a bunch of people go, and then still grabbing guys in the portal, or do you think their roster is pretty set defensively?
Yeah, this is been a pretty hot button topic for Oregon fans over the past couple weeks. Just anticipating the spring portal, knowing that we're so far over the scholarship limit, and kind of something that I've been listening to various people talk about over the past few weeks, and kind of the consensus that people are hearing is we primarily expect that. There will be more departures than incomings. I think, if you have kind of some of those surprise guys, some of those playmakers, particularly on the defensive line that become available, I think, Dan and company are going to make a call and see if there's, mutual interest there. And if something's able to get, formed based off that, then, there's obviously no reason to count that out. But I think what fans can expect to see is that there are definitely more departures than additions. I don't think it's something where they're heading into the spring portal, absolutely attacking it as aggressively as they have in the first half of the portal season this year. So I would be kind of surprised to see more than 1, 2 if that happens. But we're definitely going to see a couple losses just due to sheer scholarship numbers. And unfortunately, I do think some of that's going to come on the defensive line. I think when you have wide open competition like this in that defensive line, when you have these guys who might be sitting in the three deep and are kind of, they're looking at more bench time than they are playing time. Regardless of their skill level, I think what's going to happen there is we're going to see some of those guys maybe jump into the portal, head to a smaller program where they're going to have a better opportunity to play. So I do think we're going to see some subtractions on the defensive line and in the secondary, just because once again, there's a lot of youth in both of those positions. And as we know, they're very top heavy with some of the portal guys that we've gotten.
Gotcha. And then let's go ahead and flip to the other side of the ball, offense, wide receivers. Um, Obviously, losing a guy or two with the draft, but always replenishing that. Obviously with the big wide receiver take, we talked about last week, the 4-star wide receiver. So it seems like, Dan has a type. Speed is definitely his type. He's got speed everywhere on that wide receiver room. How are they faring out with these scrimmages?
Yeah, the wide receiver room is definitely another room we are hearing more praise from than anything else. I know one word that came up multiple times. You just kind of mentioned it leading into this question was the speed. We know obviously Evan Stewart has elite level wide receiver speed. Tez Johnson, absolute burner as well. Trayshawn Holden, same goes there. So it's just the sheer amount of depth in that wide receiver room, and they are all quick. That there's not a lot of finesse guys in there per se when you're talking prototypical speed. But yeah, that's one thing that we're definitely hearing out of the wide receiver room is how quick they're looking. They're looking very sharp. I know, Dan had mentioned that the deep crosser has been effective to this point in the spring. Obviously when you're bringing in that level of speed on the outside and you got guys like Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson on multiple sides, it's really hard to defend that. So that's something that we're seeing. And, wide receiver room is definitely another room to keep an eye on as we head into the spring portal. I had mentioned it a couple weeks ago, but Kyler Casper is a name that I'm putting out there that is a potential portal entry. A really young guy, got tons of talent. It's just at this point, we're seeing so much competition taking place in that wide receiver room, and something's going to budge. You know, could he stay? Absolutely. It's not like wide receivers a room where we absolutely have to subtract someone, but I think that's a high possibility that we see someone exit that wide receiver room.
Gotcha. And then before we get into the injury updates, what offensively, what do you, besides Casper, what are you expecting with the rest of the positions, running back, offensive line, stuff like that, tight ends? Are you expecting some departures on those guys too?
Yeah, I think starting with the O line, once again, there's a lot of youth on the O line, similar to the D line, where the competition's a little bit more open. Um, I think we're going to see some of those guys in that 2-3 deep maybe test the waters in the portal, just because once again, there's going to have to be a position where something's got to give, and that would kind of be a key position there to keep an eye on. Solid offensive linemen are an absolute premium once they hit the portal. I think they know this. So if they're going to have the opportunity to, hit the portal and enter a program where they're able to get playing time a little bit sooner, I think, that's something to keep an eye on for sure. I don't really have an exact name off the top of my head for that offensive line group, just because it really truly is so wide open once we start hitting that 2 and 3 deep. That there's a lot of interchangeable pieces that play multiple positions. So, obviously that makes it difficult. So the things that Dan keeps tight-lipped, within the program, kind of who's truly running with the 1s, 2s, 3s, that stays pretty tight-lipped. And actually one thing to note on the kind of that front is, they're not running true 1s, 2s, and 3s this year. What they're running is they're running green, yellow, and white teams. So it's a lot of mix there. I think what it is, it's more so to get, the cohesiveness on all layers of it, because Oregon does, substitute in so frequently. But it's, once again, another way to kind of keep the media on their toes and not create storylines as to who could be hitting the portal here. So I don't know. I'm just as intrigued as everybody else to see kind of what that brings early this week. But unfortunately, we are going to see a couple losses just in terms of depth due to this year's scholarship numbers.
And then if there was one position group that you would say, let's do this, one position group that is safe from the transfer portal, that for sure 100% nobody's going there, nobody's going into the portal, and then the one position that is going to have the most loss that you think.
Yeah, so in my opinion, one of the safest rooms I would say is the tight end room. Terrence Ferguson and Patrick Herbert both will be exiting the program this year. I think their roles are going to be very similar to what they were last year. Terrence just being strictly more of a receiving tight end. Patrick Herbert obviously is more of a run blocker and effective that way. And then Kenyon Sadiq running the 3 deep. He was the #1 player out of the state of Idaho a few years ago. Brings a ton of talent. He put on like 25 pounds of muscle this year. So, he's starting to bulk up a little bit. And I think we're going to see him, take on some major snaps this year as well. So I think that tight end room's pretty safe, at least down to that 3 deep. Obviously there's always the possibility that some of these redshirt freshmen, true freshmen will bury down in the chart, exit the portal. But in terms of like big names, I don't think we're going to see anybody from the tight end room. But the room that I think, potentially we're going to see loss, I mentioned it earlier in the program, got to stick with it again. It's definitely that defensive line room. There's so much competition. Somebody's unfortunately not going to be able to get the role that they want. As like I said, with the offensive lineman, kind of same goes with the defensive lineman, especially now in the Big Ten, that, when these guys hit the portal, they're a little bit more of a premium. So I think, just due to the fact that there's going to be so much interest in some of these guys who could potentially be hitting the portal, I think, we're going to see them test the waters there. So.
Yeah, for sure. And then obviously some guys, let's get this out there. Some guys are going to be asked to be obviously we're going in a different direction. So not every transfer portal guy is a kid just out looking for money or better NIL deal or better playing time. Some of these kids actually, they're like, hey, it'd be best for you because you're not going to have a scholarship here, to go hop yourself into the portal. And the school's never going to come out and say that. But you can read between the lines on some of the kids.
Yeah, and especially, when we're talking guys who aren't necessarily those household names, there's only a select few people who are getting these massive NIL deals that, fans seem to think everybody's just, they're just handing these deals
Yeah.
out left and right. There truly is tiers to it, and there's not a lot of household names that are getting that, the bag per se as everybody thinks they are. But yeah, some of these guys that are buried on the depth chart, it's strictly about, trying to keep their football careers alive and being able to properly develop if the goal still is to make it to the next level, which, you would assume if you're playing Power 5 football at this point, you probably want to make it to the NFL if at all possible. You got to give yourself the best chance to do so. And you can't really blame the guys for that. I know, we see the guys hit the portal and all of a sudden the comments are, oh, this guy's chasing a bag. Oh, he's scared of competition. Well, that's not always the case. So, like I said, something's got to jive at some point, and especially when we're talking about guys who it's the difference between being able to, get snaps in their final years of football, potentially, or, ride the bench for their entire careers. So,
Or even get their school paid for.
yeah, right,
So
exactly. There is still a degree where, if you're on scholarship, obviously you're getting your education paid for. You might not be getting the $400,000. Damian Martinez from Oregon State was complaining about he didn't get, but it's a free tuition. You still get the opportunity to compete at this level, and keep your hopes alive.
And then let's go ahead and go over injury bugs. Did you get through the scrimmage injury free? And then obviously we talked about last week some guys getting out of that non-contact jersey and making some steps, that kind of got bit by the injury bug early. Are those guys still moving along and progressing in their their cycle of the injury?
Yeah, so a name we talked about in that non-contact jersey was Jaleo Florence last year. Last year's cornerback too. Um, poised to see a big role again this year. We haven't really heard much from him here. I did see that he was not mentioned in the scrimmage notes at all. So, I can only assume to this point where he probably wasn't participating, which is not necessarily a surprise. We did know that they were going to take that progression slow, trying to rehab an injury, just so it's not lingering around throughout the season. As we know in the Big Ten, depth's a key piece there. So we're going to need him as well. And Noah Whittington, the other one that people have kind of been keeping an eye on throughout the offseason, has continued to practice as normal. So it seems like, they're being very careful with some of these live reps that they're taking, but he is seeing contact. So we do expect him to be back and fully healthy. And yeah, great news for Oregon Duck fans. We have no new injuries to report that I've seen to this point. So anytime you can get out of a scrimmage, injury free, it's definitely a good thing. Just because and we know in the spring some of these injuries they add up and they linger throughout the season.
Yeah, for sure. So, well, that's great news. We will be back again next week, and I'm sure we'll have some more scrimmage updates. They're going to keep scrimmaging, and then obviously, next week we'll talk about portal talk and who left and who's coming and kind of what they're doing, because there's going to be it's going to get pretty rough and rowdy here in the next 72 hours, I would say. And you might get a guy. It might not all be out, so you might get a guy that you weren't expecting. So we'll talk about that next week. I am Cody the Professor, and we got Derek the Duck, and we will see you later.